Yes. Okay, so digestive tract, chapter 23 in your open stacks. Really, just the very last section of chapter 23 does get into a little bit of the physiology and the functional aspects of digestion. So you don't necessarily have to worry about that. The first basically it goes in the order that we're going in. So each subsection of 23 starts basically in the mouth and works down to the rectal area, and then we'll add in some accessory structures at the end. So when we look at the digestive tract, we are going to divide it into upper and lower. Before we get going, kind of your introductory functional aspects regarding the digestive system. It probably, I think, at this point goes without saying, but we need to eat and we need to get certain nutrients so our cells can perform a variety of different activities. Mitochondria can convert carbohydrates into energy. We see ribosomes and rough ER converting proteins, amino acids into proteins, which are generally structural features of our body, microstructures, as well as enzymes are going to be protein based. So, we see a lot of need for protein manufacture. So lipids and fatty acids with the smooth ER or smooth endoplasmic reticulum in our cells, again, responsible for some of our hormone production, responsible as well for energy storage and some of our basic uh, cholesterol, good cholesterol aspects that we'll discuss a little bit more next semester. So I'm not going to get too much into physiology, just like we've stuck with that plan throughout this semester. We're not going to veer from that. So this is about the only chemistry that you're going to see this chapter, this semester. Next semester, we'll spend a good week, maybe more, on nutrition and the basic chemistry of the digestive system. So, again, we're dealing with the three biggies: carbs, proteins, and fats. How do we get carbs, proteins, and fats out to those mitochondria, ribosomes, rough ER, and smooth ER? Well, we need the blood to be able to do that. Well, how do we get these into the bloodstream? Well, how do I get the piece of steak broken into amino acids for my ribosomes to start synthesizing proteins? That's a lot of steps. So we need to consume it. We need to break it down further and further into those amino acids, and then certainly have some sort of pathway of delivery to get those amino acids even into the bloodstream. So, of course, as we've seen up to this point, in order to get anything into or out of the bloodstream, we do see capillary networks. So there's going to be a lot of capillaries involved, just like we saw with the exchange of gases in the alveoli of the lungs. We're going to see a vast capillary network in the small intestines particularly. So anyway, that's kind of the basic function of the digestive system, is really to get nutrients out to the cells. So beyond just those big three, carbs, proteins, and lipids, we also think of vitamins and minerals, which again, we're not going to discuss or get into those this semester. We will next semester. So but keep that in mind. Those are the big five items that solid wise that we need to get into the bloodstream. So we'll look at the main organs of the digestive system. We're going to see a primary tract, which is again is a fancy term for a tube. So basically, one long continuous tube that starts in the mouth and continues all the way to the anus. So, 20 to 25 feet of tubing in a couple of feet of space. So you can imagine there are a lot of curves and twists and turns and convolutions within that tube or concerning that tube. So we're also going to see some accessory structures that are going to assist with some of the chemistry of digestion. So let's see. We do see the abbreviation GI, gastrointestinal. Gastro means stomach. Intestinal has to do, of course, with the intestines. We will see the oral cavity involved. The kind of like every system we do, we start with where we began the semester. We start the digestive system talking about body cavities, body regions, body locations, terms you're familiar with since day one. And then we get into a little bit of the chemistry, a little bit of the cellular, a little bit of the tissue stuff, and then talk about the main organs. So we're seeing the oral cavity into that mediastinum of the thoracic cavity, and then passing through the diaphragm into the abdominal cavity, and then continuing all the way into the pelvic cavity. So that's basically what it's reminding you of. This first kind of bullet is don't remember these terms, because you will see them the rest of the semester. You probably can recall hearing that frequently. So, well, here you go. Here's another example of that. So when as we move, and the chemistry stuff we already did, carbs, proteins, fats, we'll discuss a little bit more of it as we go. But before we do, let's talk about the basic structural aspects of that GI tract. When we go from mouth to anus, we have one continual modified tube. And that modified tube is going to look generally the same throughout, again, with that term modified in there, meaning there will be some slight modifications or changes depending on what part of the tract we are located. So when we break it down, though, to the structural micro aspects, we're going to look at this tract in the same way we looked at the respiratory tract, and with the same way we looked at blood vessels. We have a tube, so there's going to be a lumen. The lumen is where the food is going to travel through, right? Well, that lumen is going to be lined with epithelium. So with the GI tract, that epithelial lining is called mucosa. That's the mucosal layer, is the epithelial lining. Okay, so you could assume just from the name that we must be dealing with mucus. All right, well, it's a pretty safe bet. So mucosal lining, and we'll look at it in picture or illustration color form here in just a second. So just, again, going all the way back to tissues, and in week about 3 or so, we have epithelial as a lining or a covering. Then we have connective deep to the epithelium, and then we have the muscular layer, which again, with a tube or a tract, is going to be smooth muscle. And then we'll have connective tissue, and then back to epithelium. So it looks a lot like, it's kind of like a sandwich with the muscular layer in the middle. You're going to have an epithelium on the top as the covering. You're also going to have epithelial on the inside as the lining. And then you have connective, and then muscle in between. So that's what we're going to see here in just in just a few seconds. But mucosal is going to be the epithelial. Submucosa is the connective tissue area where we're going to find vascularization, as well as a nerve supply. And then the muscular layer, that's going to be the smooth muscle layer that's going to perform a lot of the peristaltic movements and mechanisms, some of the segmentation that we'll see shortly, that is going to enable that tube to be able to squeeze food bits from top to bottom. So anyhow, muscularis, smooth muscle specifically. And then the serosal layer kind of surrounds the whole thing. And that's going to be more connective tissue, and then some epithelial tissue. So the covering is serosa around the outside of your digestive tract. And that serosa, when we're down in the abdominal cavity and abdominal pelvic cavity, we do see that serosa has some specific naming to it. So we'll look at that as well coming up in a little while. So again, we do see some modifications and some variations in these layers. The epithelium, we're going to see some stratified squamous epithelium. We're going to see that primarily in the mouth, maybe in the high traffic areas. We also may see some stratified cuboidal as well. And then certainly as we travel further down into the stomach and into the small intestines, we're going to see a lot of simple columnar epithelium. So anyway, the lining does in fact change a little bit in structure as we go, just depending on what types of needs that we have in those regions. So we'll keep that in mind as we go, and we'll bring it up again. All right, so here we go. As our pretty illustration shows, we've got the lumen. Let me get my pointer going here. All right. Okay, so we have our lumen right in the center. Again, that's where the food is going to travel. And that first layer is called the mucosal layer. So again, that's going to have that mucus epithelium. We're going to have some glandular ducts. Okay. Okay, some glandular ducts. Here's some lymph nodes as well. And then just deep to that mucosal layer, that epithelium, we see what's called the submucosa. And again, in that submucosa, being that it's connective tissue, we would see some glandular aspects, just like we see in the dermis of the skin. We would see blood vessels. We would see some nerves. Okay, we call it the plexus, submucosal plexus, just a group or bundle of nerves. Okay, so again, it looks a lot like the dermis of the skin, and this would look a lot like the epidermis. Okay, epithelium, connective, and then we get to the next layer called the muscular layer, and we do see kind of a double layer of of smooth muscle tissue. We see a more of a circular muscle layer and then longitudinal. So the direction of these muscle cells is going to be perpendicular to each other. And again, that's going to provide the type of movement that we need to ensure that we're going to get the optimum amounts of chyme or bolus or whatever we're moving through food moved through the tract. Okay, so epithelium, connective, muscle tissue. And then finally, we end up with a little bit more connective and more epithelial tissue. We call this the serosal layer. Okay, the serosal layer. So again, we're going to have right up against the muscle layer, a connective tissue layer. Okay, there'll be a little bit of a blood supply there, a little bit of nerve passing through. And then we have the peritoneum, peri going around, peritoneum. So this would be the visceral peritoneum specifically. And then there would be a little space, and then you'd have a parietal peritoneum. So we do have, just like we saw with the pleura of the lungs, we saw it with the pericardium of the heart. We do see a double layer membrane that surrounds these organs. So in the digestive tract, the lower digestive tract, but basically below the diaphragm, we see peritoneum, and then as that outer layer. So this would be the visceral peritoneum right up against the intestines. Okay, and then they call this mesentery or mesentery. Okay, mesentery. That's the serosal layer. This is, and we'll look at mesentery coming up in a little bit. Mesentery is the newest named organ. So kind of interesting to be named or to be named an organ or classified as an organ you would have to have specialized cells and therefore specialized tissue that isn't found anywhere else. So that's what we, and this is just within the last couple of years. So we've known about mesentery forever. I mean, it's that's in the, that's in the old days books, right? That's in even at Gray's Anatomy and further back. So that's nothing new, but being able to analyze the cell structures, the cell functions, they just assumed that it was, another, just another type of serosal connective tissue. Uh, and that's what it was always kind of classified as. And so they found that the cells and the tissue are unique to themselves. There are no other cells or tissue in the body that perform what the mesentery cells do. So now we have a new organ. So they're finding more information about it as well, in regards to inflammatory conditions, right? So the itises. So mesenteric issues, including some inflammatory conditions, may be some of the roots of where folks are having some of these chronic pains in their abdomen. Let me go back to this slide. We've been treating a lot of inflammation issues of the abdominal region with some of these mucosal drugs that affect the mucosal regions, drugs that affect the nerves around the muscular and submucosal regions. And again, they're not finding very good luck with certain folks, and so they've located some inflammatory issues in the mesentery that now they're researching and conducting all kinds of experiments on how to get mesenteric inflammation down, and hopefully maybe help folks have less abdominal pains that are a mystery, right? Is it acid reflux? Is it diverticulosis or diverticulitis? What is it? Is it constipation? Is it Crohn's disease? Is it celiac disease? Is it lactose intolerance? They're starting to back up some of the wagons on identifying and treating some of those disorders that are not getting better with the treatment, and looking at maybe the mesentery as being the culprit. So anyway, keep that in mind. That's new. I mean, relative to what we're doing in medical, mesentery being an organ, mesentery being researched as a culprit for chronic abdominal pains, and then potentially some of our cancers that we're finding more and more of. We're seeing a lot more pancreatic cancer, a lot more liver cancer, a lot more colon cancer, a lot more stomach cancer, duodenal cancer. It's just gloom and doom. I don't know why you guys bother. You guys are gluttons for punishment. I don't. It's close to Thanksgiving and the holidays. I shouldn't be gloomy and doomy, but those are the kind of the facts and of the what we've been seeing in the clinic. So maybe, just maybe, we can start to find some of the causation or causative mechanisms behind these various and sundry abdominal issues. So good. Stay tuned. Hey, man, I saw, speaking of pancreatic cancer, I saw that Ken Jennings, and they're going to have kind of a rotating group of folks including our LeVar Burton, Reading Rainbow guy, and previous other previous Jeopardy winners helping out with the hosting of that awesome game show. So let's get going. We're almost done. We just started, and yet we're almost done. all relative, right? But we are ready to begin with the digestive tract. We're going to start in the mouth, the buccal or oral cavity. The lips and the cheeks, of course, play a role with bringing the food in and keeping it in the mouth. We have certainly the top teeth, bottom teeth, the hard palate, soft palate, uvula, palatine tonsils, tongue. None of this is new to any of you. So this is where it all begins, and you know this already. We don't even really need to talk much about the hard palate or the soft palate. We've seen them before. We know what they're doing. That's the roof of the mouth, and we've got the tongue coming up next, helping to make up the floor of the oral cavity. And again, there's that term papillae, those little bumps located not just on the top of the tongue, but they kind of curve around on the lateral surfaces as well. And then we have a little frenulum that anchors the tongue to the floor of the oral cavity. Some babies are tongue tied, and that lingual frenulum is a little far forward or a little too far forward. And some babies grow out of it. Sometimes they have to go in and cut it back a little bit. It can inhibit development of speech, chewing mechanisms, swallowing mechanisms. So the tongue, as we know, is very important for speech and chewing. So speech and mastication. We also, so those are the intrinsic muscles of the tongue. Those are the muscles actually inside of the tongue. We haven't named any of those. You don't need to know specific names of tongue muscles. We do know that some of these extrinsic muscles of mastication or chewing, as well as deglutition and swallowing, some of those are you know, the masseter, the temporalis, the buccinator, certainly also help with chewing and speech. Yeah, we have that epiglottis as well, kind of at the base or the root, toward the, you know, just past the root of the tongue. That's going to close off the respiratory system. Then again, we had a variety of different little papillae throughout the tongue as well, and of course our taste buds. And then we had our little crypts. We'll see the term crypt, CRYPT, tales from the crypt, right? We'll see a lot of tales from a lot of crypts tonight throughout the digestive tract. So here's our first kind of example of pits. We'll see the word pit, crypt, moat. These are grooves, depressions, certainly that would show that there are going to be folds involved. There are a lot of digestive folds, not just in the tube itself being folded, but also microfolds are in the lining. That epithelium of the digestive tract is also going to have a lot of folds. Folds always increase surface area. So I have a lot more surface area by putting this fold in here. So basically what that means, if I were to measure from this spot right over here to this spot over here, you know, just looking at the screen, that's maybe like 6 inches or so across. But if I put folds in here, I get more surface area. So might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, you know, I might get 9 or 10 inches of surface area just by putting a couple of folds. So more surface area because of these folds means that we can absorb more nutrients. And for the case of the tongue, we can get more taste going. So yeah, it's all the taste buds are located down in these moats and these crypts. All right. So anyway, there's that frenulum. Okay, looking at the underside or the inferior aspect of the tongue. We also see the openings or the pores of these sublingual glands and the submandibular glands. We haven't really looked at the salivary glands yet. We will in just a couple of minutes, but this kind of introduces you to that. We have 3 sets or 3 pairs of salivary glands. 2 of them they show right here, sublingual and submandibular. So the openings of, so sublingual, it means under the tongue, and then submandibular means under the mandible. So one's a little more anterior, sublingual. submandibular is a little more posterior, but both of them have their ducts opening right underneath the tongue. So the primary, well, we'll look at what is in saliva here in just a few minutes. Here's a cross section of the tongue. You can see all kinds of different muscle fiber direction and muscle names. Again, you don't need to know the names of any of this, just showing you that you do have intrinsic muscles of the tongue. Okay. And again, in cultures around the world, lingua or tongue is people eat it. It's yummy, right? You flavor it. It's a muscle. It's like no other, like any other muscle of the body. Okay. And again, you get a free range cow tongue. They're going to be better tongue because it has had better exercise than some of these solitary or cooped up cows, CUCs, cooped up cows. And they're eating grains. Their cows aren't supposed to eat corn. Okay. Their bellies aren't, their GI's chemistry isn't made for eating corn. Okay. They eat grasses though, but corn is ground up. Anyway, you've seen all this before. All right, salivary glands, let's look at those. You've got three of them. The parotid gland, not carotid with a C, but parotid with a P. Those are going to be more up around the TMJ area. So we'll take a peek at those. Those produce a watery saliva that contains a little bit of amylase enzymes. Okay. Amylase is going to be your carbohydrate enzyme. So starches, which are your long chain big carbohydrates, starches are going to complex carbs. Those are going to get broken down into disaccharides by these enzymes in the mouth. So carbohydrate digestion does begin in the mouth. We see what are called submandibular glands. Again, those are going to be right underneath the mandible. And those also are going to contain a little bit of amylase, but they're also going to secrete a little bit of mucus. So some of the lubrication aspects will come from there. And then the sublingual glands are going to produce kind of a mucousy type of saliva. So not really anything in the way of enzymes coming from the sublingual glands. They're more there to pump out the salivary medium, primarily going to be made up of water. And you might have a little bit of lipid in there with that mucus. So again, here's the parotid right up by the TMJ and the ramus of the mandible is secreting down. And again, you can feel that one almost kind of tingle or secrete, right? If you haven't eaten for a while and you bite into, a piece of candy or especially kind of like sweet stuff, a sweet sugary, like a Sour Patch Kid or something. Ooh, yeah, that'll get that parotid gland going and tingling. Okay, and then you've got, again, under the mandible, the submandibular gland, and then right under the tongue, the sublingual gland. Okay. Oops. Okay. So submandibular, we're going to see a couple different types of cells because the submandibulars, this one back here, it does produce enzyme and mucus cells. So we're going to see mucus cells and serous cells. And again, just this is FYI, just again, I guess showing you that we do have this epithelial lining of a gland and a duct is going to be more or less that simple cuboidal look. So you never get away from it, right? All right, so typical tooth is up next. We're going to look at some of the basics again. Unless you're going in to be orthodontics or dental hygienist or dentistry itself, you're probably not going to do a heck of a lot with teeth, but we do see what's called the crown of the tooth. That's the exposed portion of the tooth, and that's going to be covered with something called enamel. Some folks get crowns put on their tooth, right? So you can get like a gold crown or a silver crown put over a tooth. And then the neck is where the crown, and basically where the crown ends and the root kind of connects the crown to the root, the neck. Okay, so you would see that right around the gingiva or the gums. And then the root is not going to be exposed. That's going to fit into the socket of the alveolar processes of your mandible and maxilla. Okay. And then we've got a couple of, the enamel also we'll find is going to have dentin and cementum. Okay, so that's going to provide a little bit of extra strength to the teeth. Okay, so again, we've got the crown, the part that you guys can see, and then the neck is right there again by the gingiva and kind of where, which is the gum, and right around where you're going to floss. That's the neck of the tooth, and then of course the root down in the mandible or maxilla. Okay, so we've got the enamel, and then there's some dentin, okay, and then we've got the pulp cavity. So enamel, oh, this is kind of cool. Yeah, they blew up, show you the enamel rods and some of the, there's going to be some cementum cementum's going to be down here. That's what cements the tooth to the bone. But anyway, you've got these enamel rods. These are going to be a dense protein. Okay. Almost like osteons, okay? But you don't have blood supply in that enamel. So when the enamel becomes porous, and then it gets down into the dentin, and then we get to the pulp cavity, that's what we're trying to avoid, right? So brushing of the teeth, nutrients, of course, vitamin C, calcium, vitamin D, okay, magnesium, phosphorus, those are all going to help strengthen teeth. They also say that pulling helps teeth. It's kind of like almost like rinsing your mouth out with Listerine or something, but like pulling the liquid through the teeth. So kind of doing that with the liquid. That pulling, actually, they say kind of activates and helps strengthen the teeth a little bit. Some people pull with like coconut oil, or they'll pull with different viscosities of oil. And then, you don't want to drink that. Of course, you'd spit it out. But yeah, some folks do pulling to help strengthen the enamel. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, really, nutrition plays a big role, but so does genetics. Genetics does play a role as well. There are folks we've dealt with that brush their teeth 2-3 times a day. They have their whole lives, and they just have really weak enamel and dentin. And the other folks who take very little care of their teeth, they have very strong teeth, but their issues come from problems with hygiene of the flossing variety. So they're getting issues more down in this area, but they do have strong teeth. So anyway, you can't really say one way or another what's what, but regarding teeth and teeth health. Okay, but we do know that for the most part, you want to brush regularly, you want to floss regularly, and you want to use a little bit of Listerine as well. Scope's good too, but some of the mouthwashes do have a lot of sugar, so you want to be careful with that. Now, if we do have to do a root canal, they go all the way down into the root and actually deaden the whole tooth. We have two types or two kind of sets of teeth, right? Your baby teeth and your adult teeth. You have 20 baby teeth, and they're called deciduous teeth, and then 32 permanent teeth. those 32 permanent teeth do include the wisdom teeth. So if you had your 4 wisdom teeth removed, you would have 28 teeth. All right, so chewing, mastication, done with the tongue, done with the teeth. Okay, swallow or go through what we call deglutition. Deglutition is the act or process of swallowing. So that's going to occur, of course, in the pharynx, and we're going to see what are called what I think the plural of a bolus is boli, Bolis, but I think boluses is also acceptable. So I don't know. I'll probably say boluses. And it's, I don't know, it's like octopus, octopi, octopuses. I don't know, right? So anyway, boli, boluses. Either way, they're little tiny balls, little tiny balls that you're chewing your food, and your tongue and teeth are forming all that food into a little bolus. And then when you swallow or go through deglutition, it's the bolus that's traveling down the esophagus heading toward the stomach. Once those each of those boluses reach the stomach's going to, not once each of them, but as they go into the stomach is going to be performing kind of a blending or mixing action. So the esophagus is the next stop then after we leave the oral cavity. At this point, we really have no control now what happens. Everything from this point on is simply autonomic, right? It's automatic. Chewing and that there is some conscious control, at least there should be. And then once you swallow, which is also conscious, from there to the toilet, well, not to the toilet, you have some control at the end too. So the entrance, there's some control, and then at the exit you have some control. Everywhere in between, pretty much relying on your 20 or so feet of GI tract and the accessory organs to be doing their jobs. So anyhow, the esophagus is going to extend from the pharynx down through the diaphragm and into the stomach. It does travel then along that mediastinum area of the thoracic cavity. We're going to see stratified squamous epithelium in the mouth and in the esophagus. We're going to see the reason for that is the mouth and esophagus are high traffic areas, just like we see with the skin, stratified squamous, high traffic area. So we definitely need more layers for protection. So we do break it up into the cervical, thoracic, and abdominal portions. The abdominal part is going to be relatively short. And once the esophagus passes through the diaphragm, there isn't much left before it opens up into the stomach. Now the esophagus does, so we're going to see sphincters now throughout the rest of the digestive tract. Our first sphincter is going to be what they call the upper esophageal sphincter, the UES. That's going to be, again, right just past the pharyngeal area, just as the food is leaving the pharynx, the mouth and the pharynx. It's a little sphincter is going to open up, and now you're in the esophagus. And as food gets squeezed through by what we call peristalsis, by the esophageal sphincter, or by the esophageal muscles, we're going to then get to another sphincter right before entering into the stomach. That would then be called the lower esophageal sphincter. So you have the upper esophageal sphincter, lower esophageal sphincter. And again, a sphincter is basically like a valve. In fact, they oftentimes will use the terms synonymously. A sphincter and a valve both prevent backflow. So again, once we pass through these sphincters, hopefully we keep the line moving. Okay. So here's that upper esophageal sphincter. And then, so this would be the cervical region and then the thoracic region. And then we pass through the diaphragm. And then we have this short little abdominal region before we then get to that lower esophageal sphincter. Okay, and then the lower esophageal sphincter takes us then into the stomach. This is a spot where acid reflux, heartburn, GERD, that's that LES, lower esophageal sphincter, oftentimes is what gets affected. We could even see some ulceration occurring on the esophagus wall or in the esophageal lining, as well as with that sphincter. Okay, so again, we do see that stratified squamous epithelium. And again, this is all the mucosal layers. This is all epithelium. Then we get into the submucosal and then the muscular layer. And then for the esophagus, they don't call it, um, they don't call the outer layer the serous. Remember, we had mucosal, submucosal, muscular, and then serous. That was primarily for the lower GI tract. So the esophagus is going to be surrounded with what they call adventitia as opposed to serous. It's more fibrous. It's more tough. It's we're able to keep the esophagus more stationary. So this fibrous coat is what's going to be connected with the trachea and some of the other tissue in that mediastinal area. So you're not going to see that serosa layer, around the esophagus. All right, stomach, 1 to 1.5 liters is the roughly the capacity. When there's no food in there, it's about the size of a bratwurst. So it's not much bigger actually than the esophagus. The esophagus, the esophagus is like the diameter of maybe like a Sharpie or even an Expo dry erase marker. And then as we get to the stomach, if there's nothing in the stomach, it just puffs out a little bit to being, similar to, like a brat or a Polish sausage or something. So anyway, of course, it distends pretty easily or expands pretty easily. It's in the upper part of the abdominal cavity. It does sit a little bit under the liver as well as the diaphragm. And again, the size does vary based on a variety of factors. We do see four divisions of the stomach, what we call the cardiac division or the cardia, and then the fundus, the body, and the pylorus. Okay, so as we enter into the stomach from that from that lower esophageal sphincter, we call that the cardiac region. That's where the term heartburn comes from. Again, right here, just above, where my red line is going. So just above the stomach, this is going to be the diaphragm. It's going to be a little bit of liver and then the diaphragm here. Okay. Well, right above the diaphragm, right in this spot, is going to be the heart. So especially that lower, the apex of the heart, the right and left ventricles into that apex. That's not very far really from this region. So if we do have some acid reflux issues, it can feel like something, especially if it's splashing up into the esophagus. It can really feel like there's something wrong with the heart. So anyway, that's the cardia region or the cardiac region, and then the little kind of the superior apex there we call the fundic region or the fundus. Okay, and then the body makes up the majority of the stomach, and then the lower region is called the pyloric region or the pylorus. We also do notice we have three different muscle layers. So again, we see the serosal layer, the muscular layer, the submucosa, and the mucosal layers from superficial to deep. Okay, so it's showing that we do have three different muscle layers. Again, it has to do with the direction of the muscle cells, okay, how they're aligned. So we have a circular, an oblique, and longitudinal. So more up and down fibers, okay, kind of rounded circular fibers, and then oblique fibers. So multiple directions, allowing for multiple ways of expanding and certainly contracting. Okay. We have what they call the greater and lesser curvature. So you see it's a little smaller on the, this would be the right side of the stomach. This would be the left side of the stomach. Okay, and then the lining of the stomach is going to be covered in these ridges called rugae. You see that term rugae, Rugae. Those are like folds or curves, convolutions in the lining of the stomach. All right, and then as we start to leave the stomach and we're in that pyloric region, we have what we call the pyloric sphincter. So a sphincter to enter the stomach and a sphincter to leave the stomach, just like the esophagus. Upper esophageal sphincter, lower esophageal sphincter, okay? Stomach, lower esophageal sphincter to the pyloric sphincter. And then we'll see there's a sphincter at the end of the line for the small intestines. So as we leave the stomach and enter the small intestines, we pass through the pyloric sphincter into the first section of small intestines. We call it the duodenum or the duodenum. So that's where we're going to travel to next. Real quickly, I did want to mention the stomach wall or stomach lining is, again, it's epithelial in nature, and it has those rugae. And those rugae are folds. So when you see the term rugae, you're thinking of folded or folds in the stomach lining. There are going to be little pits or crypts called gastric pits. And within those pits, we're going to see some different types of cells. We're going to see chief cells and parietal cells. That's where we're going to find some of the enzymatic release, production and release. We're also going to see hydrochloric acid being secreted from the parietal cells. Okay, there's going to be some endocrine cells as well. Gastrin and ghrelin are two hormones that are going to be produced and released by the stomach. So gastrin and ghrelin. Gastrin is going to be, is basically going to be both of these really are kind of hormones of the appetite. They're ghrelin especially. We think of ghrelin and stomach growling. We've seen it before when we did endocrine system. Well, here it is again. We'll also look at it next semester in advance. But yeah, ghrelin is kind of a stomach growling hormone. So when the stomach is empty and it's really empty, signals sent to the brain, appetite center sends back. We get ghrelin going. That gets the stomach kind of growling. We start what's called the cephalic phase, where we start to think about food. Oh man, I remember that one time I was at Golden Corral and I had this chocolate fountain dessert. I don't know. Anyway, right? So start thinking about it. You start, maybe you hear some pots and pans clacking. Maybe there's a TV commercial you're hearing, you're seeing. Maybe you're, you can smell some food going. You start to salivate a little bit. That's what they call the cephalic phase. And the stomach really starts gurgling and growling and getting wound up. That's gastrin and ghrelin. Gastrin kind of gets some of your gastric juices ready. Hey, it starts kind of triggering the process to get ultimately everything ready. Because if the cephalic is kicked in, what you're going to start to see that the stomach assumes that means I smell food, I hear food, I see food, then I better be ready to receive the food. So that's what's going on with the kind of the endocrine connection and the stomach. And again, we go through that in a little more detail next semester. Back to chief cells secreting enzymes, we look at something called pepsin. Pepsin is going to help with protein digestion. So we do see protein digestion begin in the stomach. We also see some lipid digestion beginning in the stomach as well. So carbohydrates in the mouth. Okay, so carb digestion begins in the mouth because of that salivary amylase being there. And then in the stomach, we see proteins and fats starting to get digested. Now, this is truly just the beginnings of digestion. There's really no absorption going on. There's not a lot in the way of we're still just prepping all of those big macro molecules. Okay. Let's see. So there we can see some of these gastric pits, some of the glands. Here's parietal cells and chief cells. Again, we're going to go back to this one. Okay, chief cells are secreting enzyme. Parietal cells primarily are secreting hydrochloric acid. So they're, spread throughout. We have some of those endocrine cells, okay, gastrin and ghrelin. Yeah, that's all in that mucosal layer, these big, deep grooves or pits. And then again, we see these rugae being formed. Okay. And then the submucosa, that's going to be the connective tissue. And then the muscular layer, and then the serosal layer covering the whole stomach, which again is going to include and be a part of that mesentery that we'll see coming up. Functions, again, gastrin and ghrelin, protein and lipid digestion beginning here. Basically, the stomach's kind of like a blender. It's like the ninja or the, it's like a food processor. So all of those boli that we swallowed, they're going to get blended and mixed up together into something we call chyme, chyme. Okay, so chyme is going to be the fluid that leaves the stomach. The stomach acids also help with some of the bacterial aspects. So a lot of the foods that we eat, if they do have something that's less desirable, some sort of pathogen, a bacteria that we probably is not good for us, the odds of it affecting us beyond the stomach are oftentimes pretty slim. If the bacteria does get past the stomach, you usually know it. You're going to have lower abdominal pains, gas, and maybe the runs. If the stomach keeps it and is unable and doesn't want it, you might get it, reverse peristalsis, it's called. Emesis, they also call it. You might puke. So, but anyway, the stomach acids do kill a lot of bacteria that you or I wouldn't even know we're being exposed to. All right, so that leaves the upper GI tract. Even though the stomach is below the diaphragm, it's still considered part of the, still the upper GI tract. So the lower GI is going to be small intestines on down. So as we leave the pyloric region of the stomach and go through that pyloric sphincter. Oh, and by the way, that pyloric sphincter, you guys have probably heard of projectile vomiting with newborns, and they might be a couple days old and they still haven't pooped and their bellies are super distended and they shoot vomit 2 or 3 feet. Not all babies, newborns especially, kind of spit up and dribble, but these are like exorcist level spewing. So that is usually caused by something we call pyloric stenosis. So the pyloric sphincter is dysfunctional, didn't develop properly for some reason, maybe a kink in the hose. So they have to go in and get that kink cauterized, or might need to be awakened. So, but anyway, we activate that pyloric sphincter, and then that gets baby nutrients, because baby's not absorbing nutrients, right? If we're not getting anything past the stomach, that's bad. Okay, the stomach, by the way, too, remember the stomach is right under the diaphragm. Your stomach's not way down by your, by your belly button or down by your waist. Okay, your stomach's way up here. Okay. This is your liver. It's right underneath there. Here's your diaphragm. Okay. So yeah, you got to get food into the lower GI tract, into the small intestines, in order to get nutrients to the cells. So it's bad if babies, projectile vomiting. We got to fix it. So anyway, we leave the pyloric region. We enter into the small intestines. Uh, we have three divisions called the duodenum or the duodenum. We just saw that a few minutes ago. That's the shortest division of the small intestine. It's kind of C-shaped. It's only maybe 10 to 12 inches long. So it's about a foot long. Okay. The jejunum is the next section of small intestine. And then a little bit longer than the jejunum, the ileum is the third section of small intestine. I'll come back to those. So we've got the duodenum first, then the jejunum, and then the ileum. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, that's pretty long, 2.5 meters. See, there's roughly 3 feet, a little more than 3 feet in a meter. So this is about 7-ish feet. And then this is about probably around 10 feet. And then this is right around a foot. So 1 foot plus that's 8. So there's like 18 feet of small intestines. 18 feet. If you live in a 2-story house, that's probably, that's 20 feet. So from ground to the peak of your house, that's how much just small intestines that you have. And the walls, let me back. Oops, there we go. Sorry about that. The wall, the intestinal lining or that epithelium of the small intestine is going to be very curved with what we call villi. So villi are simply modifications of that epithelial or mucosal layer that do, again, provide more surface area for absorbing nutrients. And within each one of those villi, each is a villus, multiple are villi. So there you go, bolus, boli. Well, I guess that answers that. So multiple bolus is our boli. Multiple villus are villi. Anyway, so each villus is going to contain an arteriole, a venule, therefore then a capillary vessel. So that they call it a lacteal vessel. Okay, and then we're going to see what they call a brush border that makes up the surface of this epithelial lining. They call it a brush border. We'll see what are called brush border enzymes. Some of them have kind of little bristles, the brush border cells. And then again, we see more crypts, which are going to be where we're going to find some stem cells or differentiating cells of these tuft cells, goblet cells from this intestinal villus. So this is the lumen right here. This would be the epithelial lining, and here is a villus, and a villus just simply is a modification in the lining to give a curve to, and therefore more surface area to the villus or to the lining of the small intestine. So that's what a villus is, a curvature in the lining of the small intestine. And each of those villi are going to be, they're going to have endocrine cells, that brush border enzymes being released. You see tuft cells that are going to be moving some food and nutrients down through. And then all the way down in what we call the crypt is where this is the nursery. So as you can imagine, these cells are shedding constantly. In fact, a high percentage of your fecal matter is actually intestinal cells that have been that have been shed. It's like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? Shredder. So, but anyway, so cells have been shed, and so therefore we need to replace those cells, and that's where we're going to see a lot of stem cells, differentiating cells in the crypts or way down in the nursery. Very well protected. So anyway, we're going to have goblet cells. Again, this is mucosal lining. So you could see these big grooves. And then we see the crypts. And the crypts, again, are where the stem cells are going to be. So as these cells are sloughing off and shedding, new cells are coming up and replacing them. Okay, again, duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. The small intestines are the site of absorption. This is where the majority, really all the nutrients that you've consumed are going to go into the bloodstream. So that's what the primary aspects of the small intestines are, the absorption of nutrients. And again, within those villi, you're going to have arterioles, venules, and capillary beds with lacteals stored in here. So nutrients are going to be absorbing into the capillary bed there. All right, we're almost there. Large intestine is next. Okay, so large intestine is length 1.5. So you're looking at maybe around 4 feet. Yeah, maybe closer to 3.5 feet. Okay. We're going to have 3 divisions of the large intestine: the cecum, the colon, and the rectum. So colon is not your large intestine. Colon is a region of the large intestine. So there's more to it than just the colon. All right, so as we leave the ileum of the small intestine, we have another valve. So as we entered the small intestines, we had the pyloric valve up at the stomach entering to the duodenum. As we leave the small intestine at the ileum going into the large intestine, we see the ileocecal valve. So ileocecal valve, this is now going to be in the right lower quadrant. Okay. This first section is called the cecum. Okay. It's kind of a pocket. Okay, and that cecum is where we are also going to find the appendix. Specifically, they call it the vermiform appendix. But yeah, the appendix coming off of the cecum. All right, so anyway, oh, and by the way, sometimes you might have a colostomy bag or an ileostomy bag. Hey, so if the whole colon's been removed or the colon is not functional, we may have to put a bag right down here coming right off of the ileum. Oof. Okay. That's rough. What it had, you got to do what you got to do. So especially some of the neurological, some of our Parkinson's patients may have to have one. Okay. So anyway, ileocecal valve, ileum into the cecum. As we leave the cecum, we're going to enter into the ascending colon. Then we're going to take a kind of a little bit of a turn and go across the abdomen. That's called the transverse colon. Then we're going to make another turn and head down, what we call the descending colon. And then kind of curving around, we have an S curve. Sigmoid is S, right? Sigma is S in the Greek alphabet. So this is going to be what we call the S curve or the sigmoid colon. And then that takes us to the rectum. And then finally the anus. And that's where we're going to find another sphincter. So as we enter the large intestine, we have a sphincter. And then right before we leave, we have another sphincter, or a valve. So there's valves all over the place from start to finish throughout the entire GI tract. We do see these kind of puffs of the large intestine. Those are going to be what we call haustra. We also see that the haustra underneath, there are pockets within those. So we can have fecal compaction or constipation. So again, it's important to get the fiber to kind of roto-root that out. We could end up with diverticulitis or diverticulosis, where they can become impacted and inflamed. Too much impaction, too much fecal matter, it leads to too much E. coli. So we can get E. coli infections potentially in the urinary tract that leach out from this area. Let's see. Oh, what's the point of the large intestine? It's primarily for packaging the chymes and for dehydrate the chyme and then package what's left over. So as we enter in, as we enter the large intestine from the small intestine, it's pretty chyme is still pretty liquidy. In fact, a lot of the nutrients have been absorbed in the small intestine. We're dealing with a lot of the lining cells of the small intestine. We're dealing with some of the waste products, but it's very liquidy. So the colon is going to dehydrate some of that chyme and then kind of package it into a nice bundle. Now, the time that food spends in the stomach, small intestine, colon, really from mouth to toilet is anywhere between 12 and 24 hours. So it just depends on what you've eaten and a lot of stress levels. There's a lot of factors, but generally 24 hours is the maximum time between pooping. You should poop at least, and your patients should be defecating at least once a day. So when you will be asking them about BMs, right, their bowel movements. So you want them to be honest with you. And we've had some that they've gone days and days and days without having a substantial bowel movement, and so that's concerning. We're thinking about dehydration issues. So they're absorbing a lot. They're staying plenty hydrated, but they don't have enough hydration. They're hydrated internally, but they don't have enough hydration in their colon to get the ball rolling. Um, Anyway, there's a lot of different factors, but we do need high sugar diets can lead to high dairy, mucus, sugar, processed sugars. I mean, excessive animal proteins. So all the yummy stuff. If you eat too much of it, that can cause constipation. Okay. But generally, food stays in the stomach for 2 to 6 hours, maybe around 4 hours average. The more protein and bigger amounts of protein and fats you consume, the longer they're going to stay in the stomach. Okay. So then it's going to take longer to get to the toilet. So, but anyway, those are some of your time mechanisms. The appendix, again, it comes off of the cecum. This is where we're going to find some normal gut flora or normal gut bacteria. So they think that it has to do with helping out the immune system. Now, here's that peritoneum. We've seen, again, the pleura around the lungs, the pericardium around the heart. The peritoneum is the serous membrane that's kind of a continuous sheet that surrounds the bulk of the abdominal viscera. We're going to see the visceral peritoneum surrounding it and right up against the organ, and then we'll see a little cavity or space, and then what we call the parietal peritoneum, which is going to make up the wall of the abdominal pelvic cavity. So working from superficial to deep, you've got your skin and then your fat and then your abdominal muscles, and then we get into some fascia, and now we're going to see that parietal peritoneum layer making up the outer aspect of your abdominal pelvic cavity. And mesentery is just a projection of that parietal peritoneum. And then we'll see what's called the transverse mesocolon. That's going to be an extension of the peritoneum that supports the transverse colon. So as the colon goes transverse across the abdominal region, we're going to have an extension of the peritoneum that kind of goes out and holds that in place. Okay, the transverse mesocolon, they call it. Okay. So first off, what we have is something called the greater omentum, and this actually has been lifted up off of the abdominal organs or the abdominal viscera. So normally, so this is almost like an apron. So this is kind of like the hinge of the apron. the rest of this omentum is going to fold over and cover up your abdominal contents. So this has been lifted up. So this section up here at the top would actually be right down here. So we just lifted it up to expose what's underneath. And that's where you can see the ascending, transverse, descending colons. But then you can also see where the small intestines, the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum are all kind of linked to this connective tissue we call mesentery. So this mesentery is what I was mentioning earlier, is the new organ. This is the organ that has just been given that classification recently. And therefore, again, you can imagine, I mean, look at how widespread it is. So if we have some buildup of gunk and bacteria problems, we've got a fight going on between good resident flora and our opportunistic transients, that can lead to certainly some headbutting and some inflammation going on in the mesentery, and therefore inflammation in the mesentery. And again, it could be mistaken for constipation. It could be mistaken for ulcerative colitis. It could be just mistaken for Crohn's disease, celiac disease, lactose intolerance, indigestion, GERD, pelvic inflammatory disease. Potentially it comes way down all the way into this area. Okay, so bladder infections, urinary tract infections. We're starting to wonder about the role that mesentery has been playing all these years in harboring some of the bacteria that are leading to some of our inflammatory conditions. So anyway, greater omentum, again, that's that apron that kind of covers everything up. So look at all this mesentery. I mean, you can just imagine, again, it's highly vascularized. It's pretty amazing. The structural features, the size of it all. This is where we see the vascularization that's delivering nutrients, such as oxygen primarily and some other nutrients, but also picking up the new groceries, right? We've just eaten a bunch of good groceries. The jejunum and ileum, or the duodenum, jejunum, ileum, they are absorbing those nutrients through the lining and into the bloodstream, into the capillary networks. Well, all that capillary flow, all that blood flow, that vascular network is contained within the mesentery. So again, if we're consuming a lot of bad aspartame, a lot of bad artificial sweeteners, if we're consuming things that are just not very digestible, again, that can cause some blood issues and therefore mesentery inflammation. All right, so more accessory organs. We see three more, and then we're done. The liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. The largest internal organ is the liver, around 3 to 4 pounds. It's going to be right under the diaphragm. The bulk of the liver is going to be on the right side. About 5/6 of the liver is the right lobe, and only about 1/6 of the liver is the left lobe. And then there are tiny lobes called lobules or lobules contained with even that we'll look at in just a second. The micro lobules make up the tissue of these large lobes of the liver. Okay, so we see again the right lobe much larger than the left lobe. We see the inferior vena cava associated with the liver. We also have that hepatic portal vein coming into the liver, and then the inferior vena cava is taking blood away from the liver right up to the heart. And then we have this small hepatic artery that's delivering oxygenated blood to the liver. Now, these two vessels, so this view here is an ant's eye view or a worm's eye view. We're looking at the inferior view. You're looking at the underside of the liver here. And what we see are two major vessels. Both of these vessels, even though one is blue and one is red, typically red would be going into the organ, bringing oxygenated blood. Blue would be leaving the organ, taking away carbon dioxide and other wastes. With the liver, we have a little bit different operation. We have the hepatic artery bringing about a quarter to a third of the blood into the liver, and then the hepatic portal vein bringing the rest of the blood into the liver. So roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of blood entering the liver is coming in through that hepatic portal vein. So pretty cool. We think of again, most organs, they have an artery going in and a vein going out. With the liver, we have an artery and a vein both going in. This hepatic portal vein is coming from, again, the small intestines, large intestine, stomach, and a spleen, the mesentery are all dumping their stuff into the liver. So the liver is the first organ to really receive all that carb, protein, and fat that we've just consumed. Okay, and then once it leaves the liver's going to store some of it. It's going to synthesize some of it. It's going to just keep the line moving and just get rid of some of it. That blood is going to end up in the inferior vena cava. So the inferior vena cava is the route out of the liver for blood. Okay. We also notice the gallbladder nestled right in here with the liver as well. Okay. So you can see again the hepatic portal vein coming in and the hepatic artery. Just in sheer size, we can get more blood into the liver from that portal vein than the artery, but regardless, both of these are bringing blood into the liver. And then we see these lobules are going to be kind of the capillary networks of the liver. So these are all the capillary beds of the liver. It's where we can drop off all of that stuff that we've just absorbed. And again, these capillaries are going to be sinusoid in their structure. So they're going to have larger pores in the wall, so we can get quite a bit of stuff out of the bloodstream. Okay, so this is pretty wild. It's got that nice kind of honeycomb appearance to it, connective tissue, bringing those together. And again, highly vascularized. It looks a lot like bone as well, doesn't it? It looks kind of like the osteons that we saw with bone. Yeah, these are called lobules. Okay. So that's the capillary networks of the liver. And then we dump everything into the hepatic veins and then into the inferior vena cava and then back to the heart. Okay, bile is one of the key functions of the liver, production of bile. We produce bile in the liver. We typically store it in the gallbladder. So the gallbladder does not produce bile, it stores it. Okay, the bile that's in the gallbladder does get concentrated while it's in the gallbladder. So that just means that it becomes a little, you don't need as much to get a really strong effects from it. So it does become more concentrated in the liver, or in the gallbladder. So if you don't have a gallbladder, the bile that leaves the liver is going to go straight to the duodenum or the small intestine. It's going to be less concentrated, so you might need more of it to work. So the gallbladder is a nice storage unit, and we're able to provide just the perfect amounts to emulsify or break fat globules into smaller fat globules. So without bile, it's difficult to digest fat properly. So in the clinical setting, if we have someone with a fatty stool, it could be an indicator of some problems with the gallbladder or the liver. There's some sort of bile issue going on. Okay, so how do we get bile from the liver down to the gallbladder, or gallbladder down to how do we get bile moving? Well, we do have what are called hepatic ducts that leave the liver. There's a right and left, one from the right lobe, one from the left lobe. They're going to form what they call just a hepatic duct, okay, or common hepatic duct, you might see it called. That hepatic duct is going to merge with the cystic duct, and cysto or cystic means bladder. So the cholecyst, C-H-O-L-E, chola, C-H with a K, O-L-E, that means gall, bladder, and then cysto, it means bile, actually, and then cysto means bladder. So cholecyst means bile bladder or gallbladder. So the cystic duct leaves the gallbladder and merges with the hepatic duct, forming what we call the common bile duct. Okay. And that common bile duct is going to join up with the pancreatic duct and dump into the duodenum. Okay. Now, the liver has a lot going on. It's probably the busiest organ of the body. Okay. The liver does a lot of detoxification. Again, anything that goes in the mouth and ends up in the digestive system, anything that's in the blood, is going to make its way through the liver. So the liver is basically like a giant filter. So it does help with detoxification. We see a lot of storage of nutrients. We see fat soluble vitamins stored there, vitamins A, D, E, and K. A, D is in dog, E and K, those are all stored in the liver. We see there's a million things. So next semester, we'll look again at a lot of the functional aspects of the liver. And again, the gallbladder is going to be the sac that's contained with, on the underside of the liver. You can see the cystic duct connecting with the common hepatic duct or just the hepatic duct. And then they form the common bile duct. So cysto means bladder, hepa means liver. Okay, so hepatic joins cystic, and then we get the common bile duct. Okay. Let's see. We're almost done, guys. You guys have been doing excellent. Again, concentration of bile, 5-fold to 10-fold. So you need less of it to get, the job done. So if you don't have a gallbladder, the liver has to pick up that slack. So let me go back. So I could remove the gallbladder, right? Just cut it off here. I can still get bile to travel down into the duodenum because I have this hepatic duct. Okay. So basically, bile gets produced in the liver, comes down here, and then it goes up and it gets stored here. And then when we need it during eating, we spritz it down into the common bile duct. So the liver typically, when we're eating or when we're digesting food, fats particularly, the liver doesn't really need to get involved with dumping bile down into the small intestine because the gallbladder is what is, it's got that heavy duty concentrated bile, so it just has to do some nice little spurts. It's twice as strong as what's coming straight from the liver. So anyway, if you remove this gallbladder, then during consumption and while we're breaking down lipids, we then would have to secrete twice as much bile to get the same effect that we would get from bile if it was coming from the gallbladder. Anyway, there's a gallbladder, a good healthy gallbladder, and then a gallbladder with stones. Ouch. All right, lastly, and then we're done. Pancreas, again, very lightweight. It's a pretty long organ, 12 to 15 centimeters long. So 6 inches or so. So it's not super big, and weighs only about 2 ounces. So it's very light. Let's see. A nickel weighs about 5 grams, 5 grams in a nickel, right? I don't know if you have change laying around. So 12 nickels is about the weight of the pancreas, 12 nickels. So, I mean, it does have some weight to it. It is an organ. But yeah, it's got an exocrine and endocrine portion. Exocrine is what we're focused on with digestion. Again, that's going to be secreting digestive enzymes. The endocrine portion is going to be what's secreting insulin and glucagon. So we've looked at that before. These are the pancreatic islet cells. Those are those alpha and beta cells that produce glucagon and insulin. And then over here, we have what are called acinar cells. Those are the exocrine cells that are going to be secreting a lot of your digestive enzymes into the pancreatic duct and then ultimately into the small intestines. Now, when we look at the duct system, we can see again, we've got the gallbladder and the cystic duct. We got the liver and the hepatic duct. Okay, so those two join up and form the common bile duct. Okay, and then we have the pancreatic duct. Pancreatic duct actually has two little systems. It's got the accessory duct, so that's not the main duct leaving the pancreas. We have the main pancreatic duct kind of coming together in what they call the hepatopancreatic ampulla and sphincter. So that's a mouthful. But if you did ever see hepatopancreatic, hepato means liver, pancreatic, of course, means pancreas. This is the area we're talking about. Okay. If someone does have some sort of growth, a pancreatic tumor or something, if it's over here in this region of the pancreas, it could actually it could actually stop the flow of bile out of the gallbladder and liver. And so then the person ends up with jaundice. They're producing too much bilirubin and bile for what they're releasing. And so that pigment gets absorbed elsewhere and shows up in our skin. It's kind of a yellowy orange color. Okay, so that's the pancreas, kind of nestled right in there. This is a hot spot where the duodenum is, that first section of small intestine, and where we're dumping bile. Again, bile is going to take fat molecules and make them smaller. And then what the pancreas is doing is secreting amylase, protease, lipase, and a bunch of other ACEs or enzymes that, again, continue the breakdown of all these big molecules into smaller, more absorbable molecules. So again, those acinar cells secrete the digestive enzymes, beta cells secreting insulin as our endocrine portion, alpha cells secreting glucagon. Again, it's part of the endocrine aspect of the pancreas. So that's it for digestion. You guys